righty, welcome in. It's about 7 minutes after 9 o'clock. This is the Mighty 1190 WIXE. We're glad you're with us. Welcome in to the Breakfast Club Morning Show and the Talk of the Town segment. You know, every morning at 7:15 we talk racing with Hill Overton, and a longtime sponsor of that's been Baucom Insurance and Financial Services, and we appreciate it. And Hill and I get to jibber jabber about it every morning, and Mike said, well, I want to come in and talk a little racing with y'all one day. He used to do some riding and had a lot to do with racing. Before we get into anything to do with racing, though, thanks for sponsoring Let's Talk Racing for so long. We really do appreciate it, and it's something we've done a long time, and thankfully it's one of the very few shows that we haven't had to search for sponsors over and over because you stuck with us.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Well, thank you both, and thank you for having me here. I enjoy the racing show. I'm a race fan.
Yeah.
I'm a race fan, and
makes it easier, don't it?
Yeah, and when I was doing the racing column 30-some years ago is where I first met Hill Overton. So it just seemed like a natural fit for Baucom Insurance, which, of course, I needed to plug this morning before we get too far along.
Oh, yeah. Well,
but I want to plug WIXE as well, because I don't advertise with WIXE simply because I like you guys, because I do that. I certainly like everyone here. I've gotten great response from the advertising with WIXE, and recommend anyone out there listening this morning to take a look at WIXE.
You know, you say that, but the honest to God truth of it is I have always, and I've told a bunch of people this, I've always thought it very commendable to just say to folks, hey, walk in off the street, sit down, and we'll take a look. I mean, your people, you're like any other business owner, you're paying people to work, and that takes time out of everybody's day to sit down with somebody and just look at their policy to see if it's a good policy. No strings attached. You don't have to buy. I commend the company for that, because that's something y'all don't have to do.
The thing about it, Mike, you've surrounded yourself with some really good people.
I know a lot of those folks, Jane, and I mean, you got some good folks.
They are top drawer people, and they know what they're doing, and I mean, it's just first class.
Well, thank you. I read an interview with Ronald Reagan years ago, and his theory I copied. A lot of people do. Yeah, is surround yourself with good people, show them what to do, and get out of their way.
Yeah,
that's my theory. I'm not a micromanager, and thank you so much. I know some of the staff are listening this morning, and they're wonderful. They make me look good, and I need all the help I can
Hard
get.
workers too.
Yep.
Yes, they are. Thank you.
I echo those sentiments.
So how did you wind up writing an article about racing to start with? That's the first question.
Yeah, how did all that get started?
I mean, did you just say, I think I want to write a racing article?
Yeah, give us a little background first.
Yeah, and I'm glad you guys mentioned that. That is the way I wanted to start it. I thought a lot about this the last few days. I was 25 years old, working at a pharmaceutical company here in Monroe. We had a 3-day on, 3-day off work schedule. So that gave me time to do something. But the real inspiration was Tom Higgins, who you gentlemen certainly know that name. If not, and you may know Tom. He wrote for the Charlotte Observer for many, many years. Yeah. Now been inducted into the NASCAR Hall of Fame due to his journalistic history and what he meant to the sport. Well, I read Higgins every day. Every day I would get the paper, and that's the first thing I'd do was read Tom's column. And it just hit me that, Monroe Inquirer Journal, which I have friends over there to this day, I thought, yeah, they really don't have anything. They had Associated Press articles, things like that, but they don't have, they got a sports writer, but they don't do any NASCAR. And I had no clue, no college.
And this was back in the 80s.
This is 1983.
Okay.
And I went to them in early February of 83, and I had handwritten a column on a legal pad, and I took it to the editor at the time. This was short. I can't recall his name. It's shortly before Nancy Stevens came along. You guys know Nancy. She's a great lady here in town. And I simply handed it to him and asked him to read it. And he said, it's a little bit too much cheerleading in it. And he said, you do know the difference between a column and a news article? I said, I certainly do. He said, rewrite it for me. I said, okay. I took the same legal pad, went out in his lobby, rewrote it. He said, good, we'll do it. As long as you want, for $20 a week.
Was this the beginning of the 83 racing season?
Yes, it was.
February?
Yes,
okay.
Yes. And my, I remember the article, the way it started was, gentlemen, start your engines. And he thought that was a little too much cheerleading. Personally, I thought it was pretty good. But
I think it's pretty good, actually.
Well, for him to agree to allow me to do what I wanted to do, of course, I had to please him.
So
and he wasn't hard to please.
this was not so much a newsy type who won the race kind of thing, right?
Not much.
It was more about stuff in the
it was
garage
more
area
columns. Yes, it was more
stuff.
personalities.
Okay.
Which I
more
want
there
to
were
talk about
some.
a few today.
Yeah.
Oh yes, absolutely. I think I told Archie, it may have been you or Kathy, I can't recall, and I'll tell Shane. Particularly since my pastor Chris Justice may be listening. You know, there's stories that it was an amazing time in the sport in the 80s. It really was.
Yeah.
I thought it was big. Of course, it turned out to be a lot larger later. Sure. We thought it was big in the 80s.
Right.
But there's stories I can tell and some I can't. But I've picked out a few of my favorites.
Okay.
I don't know how much time you guys will give me, so I'm not going to take a lot of time. But I promised people on Facebook that they would find this interesting. But
Sure,
going back to why I did it, it was a challenge to me. I thought, let me see if I can do this. I just want to try it. So I did a reasonable job. I mean, nothing really profound came out of it. Certainly didn't win any awards because of it.
And I guess with your relationship with the paper, that got you all the credentials you needed to get in the garage and all that stuff, or do you already have that hooked up?
Nope, did not. That was one of the motivating factors, Archie, was that it would allow me to get in the garage area.
I'm
sit
going
in
to
the
the
pit
race.
passes. Absolutely. And so I was able to walk. I could go anywhere at the racetrack.
Okay.
I could go in up to the VIP suites. I could go into the garage area. I did cover some races as news articles because typically my column ran on Sunday. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, that's race day most of the time.
Sure.
But some of the local races like Darlington, Charlotte, I would go to those races and do a Monday report because best seat in the house, great food. Mm-hmm. All the reporters are
in
up
your
there.
Early 20s.
Yeah, and there was no computers, so I'm sitting there with my legal pad.
Yeah.
And the late Jim Monroe, who you guys knew, helped me out greatly because this will sound funny to a lot of people, but I would write the article on a legal pad, and I would take it to the Monroe paper and slip it in their mail slot, and Jim would put it in his teletype or whatever they did back then. So, but I wanted to talk, if I could, and you guys throw in all the questions you want. My first really good article, I think, was when I heard about Harry Hyde. I knew who Harry Hyde was, legendary crew chief. Had a shop out near Charlotte Motor Speedway, and I knew Harry didn't have a deal, and I wondered what he'd been doing. So I simply got in my car one day and rode out there, and
just drove out to his house or shop.
Drove to the shop, and he happened to be there. Shane, he just happened to be there. And the interesting thing was, and if you've been to Hendrick Motorsports since, those buildings are still there. Hmm. They don't use them now for the race shop. They simply use them for storage and this, that, and the other. But the buildings are still there. Mm-hmm. There's a big one long building and a smaller building, and a pond, big pond out front that Harry Hyde Jr. would try a speedboat out in the pond, which was interesting because I saw that happen a time or two. But I walked in and sat down in an empty shop of about 10,000 square feet with Harry Hyde. And he was sitting there going, I just don't have a deal. I know what I'm doing, and I'm trying to find a deal. It was not many months later, Rick Hendrick came knocking on Harry Hyde's door. And all Harry Hyde was doing is like me going to the Monroe paper. I was looking for opportunity. We're all looking for opportunity, and if you're not, you should be. So Harry Hyde got the opportunity when Rick Hendrick walked in the door, and they formed All-Star Racing. And their first driver was Jeff Bodine. Eventually, Levi Garrett came along and sponsored them. It was 84, Martinsville, when Jeff Bodine won the race, and that was the day before cell phones. Rick Hendrick was at church with his mother and had no idea until he got home, and his voicemail on his phone, home phone, was full that we had won at Martinsville, and he had no idea because he was ready to bail out. But that was fun.
Okay.
And then while I was there with Harry, he pointed up to a smaller building. He said, there's a gentleman up there you might want to talk to as well, and his name is Mark Stahl. I said, well, Harry, who is that? He said, well, Mark Stahl is one of two guys. Malcolm Smith was the other, if my memory serves me correctly. They had won the Baja 500, which is an off-road race, very grueling. Mm-hmm. Most of the teams, they run motorcycles or four-wheeled vehicles. Most of those folks have multiple drivers. They drive a certain number of hours and they stop. Mm-hmm. Mark Stahl was only one of two drivers that had won the thing overall by themselves as the only driver. So there's another column. So I go up and meet Mark, get to be friends with Mark, He lived here in Union County, believe it or not. And I actually went to some races with Mark and helped him in the pits a little bit. So another opportunity. So Harry Hyde was a character. He ended up going on and having tremendous success with Tim Richmond, as we know, and the tragedy with Tim.
Yeah.
But if I never met a more direct speaking character in all my time with NASCAR, Junior Johnson would be close. I've got some junior stories as well. I don't know how much time we have, guys, or questions you want, but I'm going to flip through to
please do
a couple more. I did want to talk about the opportunity that Harry Hyde had, and Rick walked along, because opportunity is big. Any job I've ever had, and I've had several until 25 years ago when I got in the insurance business, people offer me opportunity. I took it. One thing that stands out to me too is, Archie, you may remember this, the Lake Apartments on Albemarle Road back in the 80s was one of the top spots. That was where people wanted to go to have fun. And on Saturday and Sunday at the Lake Apartments in Charlotte, they had pool parties. And it didn't matter if you lived there or not. You would be surprised how huge those things were. It was one of the places to go.
Yeah. So
anyway, Mark Martin, who was just coming from ASA, wanted to get started in NASCAR. He, with Jim Stacy, you my guys may not remember that name, but actually Stacy at one time had 5 race cars.
Oh.
And Tim Richmond drove for Stacy as well.
Okay.
JD stuck around for a while, spent all his money, and got out of the sport. He was in there 5 or 6 years. But he did hire Mark Martin, who was just a kid from Batesville, Arkansas. So I called Mark. I got his number from Tom Higgins. He said, I'm living at the lake. Do you mind? I said, I'll be glad to come over, Mark, if I can. He said, sure. So we set a date and time. Incredibly nice man. Still is to this day. I don't talk to him anymore. I haven't talked to him in several years. But one thing that stands out, this is one of the little color pieces. Mark and I are sitting there, and I'm doing an interview with him. He's talking about his time in Batesville, Arkansas, and his family, how great it is to be in Charlotte, how great it is to have a NASCAR opportunity. And then a knock comes on the door. And Mark said, excuse me. He goes, opens the door. It's a small apartment. I can see the front door. In walks one of the most pretty blonde women I'd ever laid eyes on. I'm 25 years old. Okay.
You just forgot all about racing.
For a few minutes, I couldn't remember Mark Martin's name, but he exchanged some pleasantries with the lady. She came in. He introduced her to me, and then she left. And I said, Mark, who was that? That was my mother.
Yeah.
I said, well, Mark, all due respect to you, because you and I are about the same age. Your mother is absolutely lovely. And I was a gentleman, as I try to be most of the time, and certainly was then. I said, no harm intended. He laughed like crazy. He said, are you going to put that in your article? I said, no, but I'll have an opportunity to tell that story sometime, Mark. Too bad Mark's not listening. Great fun. Mark was such a great guy, and unfortunately never won a championship. That's another story for another day.
Well, some say he was always just a little too nice.
Yeah, if anything, Mark was a gentleman in a race car. I mean,
he passed up a lot of opportunities.
Yeah, I think he did. Sure
some may have questioned, the move, but Mark wasn't known to put the move on somebody and go around him.
No, and
he never rattled anyone's cage, so to speak.
He didn't, and for better or worse, Mark had a Hall of Fame career. And he'll be in the Hall of Fame without championship.
Yeah, I think he will.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I can promise you he'll be there.
Yeah.
Now, here is, I probably should save the best story for last, and I do have one about Kel Yarborough. I'm going to make a note here so I don't forget about that. But one of my favorite stories is, I think this was 84, Buck Baker had a driving school in Rockingham. And I thought, boy, this would be sweet. I need to check this out. So Tom Higgins was my go-to guy. I said, I need a number for Buck. So, I mean, I lost my Rolodex guy. I don't know where it's at, but I had numbers for all these guys. Yeah. I mean, I had Kel Yarborough's home number. I'll get to that in a little bit because that's a great story. But Buck Baker had the driving school at Rockingham. So I called and I said, Buck, I want to do an article about your school. Love to come down. He said, sure, come down Tuesday morning. So I start down Highway 1, and my cars are a little different today, guys, than what I used to drive. And I'm sorry to admit I was driving a Toyota Celica. So I'm driving that Celica down Highway 1, headed to Rockingham at a normal speed. Look in my rearview mirror, and there's a black RX-7 with ground effects spoilers on it approaching me at pretty good clip. So I just keep my speed. There's nothing coming. He's in the passing zone, and he goes by me, probably running 100. Nothing terrible. I've driven faster than that. I don't know if Eddie, Kathy, or anybody else is listening or not, but
just say not in Union County.
Yeah, no, and that was years ago. I think the statute of limitations run on most of my speeding. But Buck Baker, once I got to the track, I saw Buck out, and he was there, easy to see. I thought he was an older guy. Turns out he was 50 at the time. I'm older than that now. I'm 57, but I have a 35-year-old brain. I have to throw that in there. So I walk up, and here's Buck Baker. I introduce myself, and there's a black Mazda RX-7 sitting there with ground effect spoilers on it. I said, Buck, that wouldn't happen to be your Mazda, would it? He said, well, yeah, it is. And I said, well, you just passed me on number one. And I said, you had it in the wind, I think is what I told him. He said, well, I was running a little bit late, and I don't know how many cops back in the day would give Buck Baker a speeding ticket. Probably none. But that was great fun. And, we did an article on the, school he had down there, met Buck down there, met some youngsters, none of them that really made it. Eddie Birchwell from Texas comes to mind. Buck thought he was really going to be a star.
Was this one of the first driving schools?
It was. Okay. It actually was. And one thing, too, Archie, that a lot of people don't know, because NASCAR has a truck series now, Buck Baker started a truck NASCAR deal way back in the mid-'80s, and it wouldn't fly because he didn't have NASCAR support. They built a pickup truck because the NASCAR truck series is simply a Saturday Xfinity. I'm sorry, it's not nationwide anymore. Saturday series is what I like to call it. It's simply that car with a truck body on it. It's the same thing. But Buck tried that years ago, and it just didn't work out. Just didn't work out because he did not have the support of NASCAR. Believe it or not, at Rockingham, where Hill Overton, our friend, was track announcer at the time, Buck actually had tractors. He had races for them. They did 2 of them. They did. I mean, unfortunately, Rockingham was one of the greatest racetracks.
I agree with you on
that was ever on the circuit. And I called one of the powers to be before it was sold several years ago and said, put seats all the way around it like Bristol, light it up, and have one race a year, and you'll pack the house. They loved the idea, of course, and they probably already had the idea. But the reason they didn't do it, the reason Rockingham suffered, 2 reasons. Number one, lack of hotels in the area. Number two, between Bruton and Roger Penske, they were buying up racetracks so they could steal the dates, if you will, take the dates and move them to Kentucky and some of the new racetracks that they were building. And it happened in North Wilkesboro, which was one of my favorite tracks.
Yeah, a lot of people miss that track.
Absolutely. If you drive by it now, it's still there, but it's grown up in weeds.
Yeah, I saw pictures of it recently.
That's a shame.
Just sad looking.
It is. You guys keep me posted on time because I could talk till noon.
Yeah, we got about 10 minutes left.
Great. Here's my favorite story. This was before cell phones. I got Kel Yarborough's home phone number from Tom Higgins. And Kel, he didn't mind. Tom didn't mind giving them to me because he knew to give them to me or not give them to me. I don't know that he would have given me Richard Petty's. I never asked for it. I had a Petty connection. I didn't need the phone number. But I asked for Kel's, and he gave it to me. So one day, I get on the home phone. I call the number. Well, Kel's lovely wife, Betty Jo, who is a real sweetheart, answered the phone. Told her who I was. I'm sure she had no clue. I'm writing for a little small newspaper. I just want to interview Kel. He had recently won the Daytona 500. This must have been 84 because he was driving for Robert Yates in the Hardy's car. Okay. If you remember, he wrecked his primary car on the second qualifying lap, flipped it, and that was the Chevrolet. They went to either an Oldsmobile or a Buick. It seems like the Oldsmobile as their backup car and won the race with the backup car.
Wow.
So I'm calling Kel down there to get his take on that. I'd already done an article with Robert Yates about that. Robert Yates was the engine builder at the time. And so back to the story, Betty Jo answers the phone, and she said, "Oh, Kel would love to talk to you." I said, "Well, great. She said, "He's on the lawnmower. Let me go get him." And before I was going, no. She'd already laid the phone down. I'm thinking, I don't want to borrow. To me, these guys are all.
He coming to the phone mad now.
Yeah. These guys are all celebrities to me, and I'm like, I'm kind of hate to approach them anyway.
Get a man off his mower.
And it was probably only 3 or 4 minutes, and it seemed like a half an hour before Kel came to the phone. And he came to the phone winded. And I thought, this is just not good. And I apologized. I said, Kel, I'm sorry. I tried to get her. I tried to stop her and say, look, I'll just call him back. You know, he said, Mike, I'm glad you called because I needed another beer. And he was very friendly about it. And that's what he said. And I said, man, this is great. You know, it's just one of those stories that sticks with me to this day. And I said, Kel, I don't want to take a lot of your time. He said, I got all the time you need. I said, you know, congratulations on the 500, blah, blah, blah. We talked for about 40 minutes.
Wow.
And I'm in the hall. You remember the old, I can't remember where I was living at the time, but I remember the old hallways where they had the hole in the wall where the phone sat.
Oh, yeah.
In the wall.
Mm-hmm.
You got to remember that. Shane won't remember that. But I'm standing in the hallway, not sitting down for 40 minutes talking to Kel Yarborough. And I thought, this is fabulous. This is fabulous. So, you know, the gist of what I did, and I've got so many stories I could tell, but time will limit us on that. It was one of the greatest times in my life to be able to do that, to have access to those guys. I mean, I'm 25, 26 years old, and I walk up to Dale Earnhardt and be able to engage in a conversation with him.
So what year was that when, you know, he came on strong, Rookie of the Year, first championship the next year? When was that?
That was 79.
79 was Rookie of the Year. His first championship was 80.
What was the buzz like back then when he was the relative newcomer at the time, the Jeff Gordon, if you would?
Well, if you were there in 84, 85, that's when he was dethroning Darrell Waltrip. Because Waltrip won his last championship in, I think, 84.
Yeah, Darrell, Earnhardt at the time was still coming along.
Yeah, he was young, and when he won Rookie of the Year, if I'm not mistaken, and I didn't do the research to prepare for that, but I'm quite certain he was driving for Rod Osterlund. Mm-hmm.
And he won the championship in 80, maybe driving for Rod Osterlund as well. And then he ended up going to Buck Moore. And he had the Wrangler car and the Wrangler colors.
The blue too.
Oh, yeah. And he did well. He did pretty well with Buck. And Earnhardt's reputation to begin with was he's going to wreck a lot of race cars. Because Dale said, I'm going to find the edge. Because if you're a winning race driver, you're on the edge all the time.
Well,
or you're not going to ever win. You have to be where you're, I guess I can say, pucker power on WIXE.
Yeah. Well, that's what endeared him to so many fans.
Sure, absolutely.
He'd put the car where most wouldn't.
No, absolutely not. And he was so good. And really, along that time, Dale was not as approachable, and it was simply because of his lack of education, his lack of public speaking. Dale went to school for that. And this is not a secret, but there a lot of people know that. He went to school, not grade school. He went and he had people coach him,
Yeah.
And once he became his more presentable, more approachable, he became really a different Dale Earnhardt.
So he was unapproachable early on, not so much of an ego thing. He didn't feel comfortable.
And simply put, from what we do for a living, he wasn't a good interview.
No,
he wasn't.
No, he was not.
He would have been boring, and you wouldn't got anything out of him.
If you have time, you or any of the listeners, go out to Google, I think, or maybe Tom Higgins' Facebook page. He talks about the first time he interviewed Earnhardt and how difficult it was. And then they became just so tight. And Earnhardt and Waltrip, even with their run-ins on the racetrack, Richmond, Virginia was one of the biggest ones, turned out to be very good friends. Dale Earnhardt Sr. was a great guy. He was a great guy. Unfortunately, I did not get to spend as much time around him as I would like. I'm real happy that Nationwide is insuring, or excuse me, they do insure, but that they are now sponsoring Junior, which is great.
Yeah.
It's just a great relationship. But once Dale went to Childress, and I saw Richard a couple of, maybe 2 months ago, he had no clue who I was, but I met him, told him what I'd done, and I worked at the Speedway in 88. I was going to talk about that today, but I'll do that another day. But when Dale went to Richard and got the Goodwrench sponsorship and started wearing the wraparound sunglasses and the man in black, Dale Earnhardt should get credit for knowing how and setting the tone for marketing a driver in NASCAR.
Well, absolutely.
He was the first one to do that.
And not only that, but he also went and bought a sports marketing company. So when everybody else had a t-shirt, he had the teddy bears and the sunglasses and the lunch boxes, and you could buy. Who was the most, and in the time you did it, who was the most intimidating character you ever met? Cause this is before Earnhardt was the Intimidator. So who was the guy that if you ever met, you said, oh man, this ain't going to be good. I mean, who was that guy then? Was it DW?
No, it was Richard Petty.
Richard Petty?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, well, intimidating for me to approach.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
But now that I've done the Kyle Petty motorcycle charity ride some, and I'm doing it again in 2 weeks, I fly to California. You guys probably seen on Facebook a picture of Richard and I sitting on a porch together in Texas. Yeah. One of my favorite photographs that will ever happen to me, ever. But in 1983, 4, and 5, to me as a kid who was a Petty fan growing up, and Hill Overton was a Pearson fan, it was like walking up to... If I were Catholic, walking up to the Pope.
Yeah.
I mean, he was NASCAR royalty then.
Yeah.
And he was towards the end of his career, although he won his 200th race in 1984. I was fishing in a fishing boat with a girlfriend of mine on Lake Twitty in 1984, the day he won his 200th race. And actually, Doug Heveron is the gentleman who spun out in turn 2 at Daytona to cause that caution. And back then they raced back to the flag.
Right.
So Richard beat Kell back to the flag, won his 200th win. Ronald Reagan was there. It was the first time a sitting president had ever been to a NASCAR track. He gave the gentleman start your engines command from Air Force One on his way down to Daytona.
Cool.
So as you guys can see, I could talk about this. What time until 5 o'clock this evening?
Well, a lot of great stories. No doubt the sport has really changed. It's got to be so confusing, and I've had an opportunity to talk to some of the race teams, but the stuff that NASCAR requires of those cars, and it's just constantly changing. It's almost impossible for a small, organization, funding issues alone, but just to be able to build a car to NASCAR specs it's so expensive. Some of the, who was it drove the Hooters car? Kulwicki. Those type teams. I just don't know if we're going to see.
Ricky Rudd,
owner operators. No, I think those days are gone. Yeah. I mean, it has to.
It's cost so much to field a competitive team.
We're almost out of time. I wanted to ask you, before we run completely out of time, one final question. Ask you about who the most intimidating person you ever met was when you were doing this. Anybody you met that was a surprise while you did this? Like, did you have your mind made up how somebody was going to be and they turned out not to be that person at all?
Yeah, Dale Earnhardt, actually.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Cecil Dees is listening or not. Cecil lives here in the county. Cecil, I was dating Cecil's cousin during this time. And Earnhardt was, I thought, just going to be terribly unapproachable. But I think what happened was when I told Earnhardt I was dating Cecil's cousin, Earnhardt and Cecil were very good friends. Oh. It was just like the cloud lifted. And all of a sudden, then
it was like, oh, he knows Cecil, so he's all right.
And then I'm just a country boy from Monroe. I mean, I still am. There's nothing changed about me other than gray hair, and I'm older. But truly, Shane, I thought because Earnhardt was up and coming, he had the reputation. Tom Higgins told me of being unapproachable. Once I got kind of he kind of lifted the veil a little bit. He was a great deal of fun to talk to.
Yeah.
Great deal of fun.
They talk like Earnhardt would talk more to you if you approached him talking about fishing or hunting.
Absolutely.
Something like that.
Yes. And the Cecil Dees thing kind of opened that up because he wanted, Cecil wasn't helping him anymore, and he will know, how's Cecil doing? Tell me about him. Is he still living down Lansford Road outside Monroe? I've been to his house, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But truly, if I could, Shane, I'll leave you with two things. One is all the people I talked to, and I've only scratched the surface today. I can talk about being at Florence Country Club, sitting at the same table with Buck Baker and his wife, and Junior Johnson and his wife, Ed Clark, a friend of mine who now runs Atlanta Motor Speedway, used to be the Humpy's right-hand man at Charlotte Motor Speedway, sitting at a table with them and having just such a great time. I could just go on and on, but one thing I kind of wanted to leave the listeners with, and I want to thank everyone that had any interest at all in listening to what I had to say this morning. Thank WIXE first. I'd like to thank the listeners, but I just want to leave people with things. I did this at 25. It's not it's not a huge accomplishment, but I felt like it was somewhat of an accomplishment to do it. And people read it. I felt good about it. But the bottom line is, it's just like today. We talked about opportunity. I was 25, no college. I wrote these columns for 3 years, weekly, during the race season, on a legal pad with a pencil. Okay, so I could easily make corrections. My point is, if there's something out there you want to do, you need to go do it. You need to go try it, because that 3-letter word try, if you don't try something that's in your heart that you might want to do, it'll never happen. This happened to me. It was wonderful, a special, magical time in my life. And fortunately, I have the majority of the columns that I wrote still. And I'm just grateful. Thank you for having me in this morning.
Oh, thank
a
you,
lot
Mike.
of fun.
Man, thanks for coming. We appreciate it a whole lot.
That very
Absolutely.
much. And
Thank you.
Look forward to hearing more stories down the road.
I'll be back if you'll have me.
Sure thing.
We'll take a break here. Be back with more of the Breakfast Club. Y'all stick around. This is the Mighty 1190 WIXE